Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Darkfall tutorial. So today we're going to be creating a stylized planet surface scene, I guess, as you can see in the example here. So the idea is I want to create a quick stylized sci-fi scene, and we're going to be using eevee rather than cycles just because it's a little bit quicker. Though you could actually do it in cycles if you want to, but we're going to be doing it in eevee, so let's go ahead and just jump right in. Let's go ahead and get rid of the default cube. In this example we don't need it. We'll keep the camera and the lamp for now. Now for the terrain, I'm going to be using an add-on that's actually built into Blender. You just need to activate it. So if we just go to Edit, then to Preferences, and then in the add-on section, if we type Landscape, and then we can see we have this Add Mesh aant Landscape, so make sure you just check this. Then we can close this down, and then if we press N, and then go over to the Create tab here, then go ahead and hit the Landscape button, and it will add a landscape. And we can see we have a whole bunch of options that we can change. But I'm going to press N, just close this. I'm also going to press T, just to free up some space. So yeah, we can also change the properties down here, which is what I'm going to do. And if this is the first time you're using this tool, make sure you go through here and just check out some of the options. There's quite a few different things that we can change and play about with. And we're not going to cover it in this video, though if you do want a video on that, maybe let us know in the comments. But for this video, we're going to go through to the presets. And we have a whole bunch of different presets, and you can choose one just to see what it looks like, and it'll update. But let's see, which one can we use? Let's try large terrain. This is going to be for the base terrain. That looks okay. So I'm going to use this one. I'm going to close this down. Now let's position the camera. I'm going to press numpad 1 just to go to front view. Then I'm going to press Ctrl Alt numpad 0, which will align the camera to the view. Then I'm going to select the camera and just move it about. So I'm going to press G, press Y, and then G, Z. I'm definitely going to be playing around with the camera angle a little bit later on, but for now let's just get this in position. Let's also rotate this. I'm going to press the R key, and then I'm going to press X just to constrain it on the X axis, and just move it down a bit like this. So something like this is going to be our main focal point. We also want some mountains in the distance, but before we do that, let's go ahead and add a material to this terrain. So select the plane, and then I'm going to go to the materials, add a new material. I'm going to call this surface, and then we can split this window and just change this to the shader editor. I'm going to press N just to get rid of this, and then we can add a texture. Now we're not going to do anything too crazy. In fact, it's going to be quite basic for this material because it's not really going to be seen that much. It's going to be a lot of compositing things that's going to make it look good. So what I'm going to do is Shift A, go to texture, go to image texture, and let's go ahead and open up a texture. So I'm just using a concrete texture. Now we'll link to some textures in the blog, so go ahead and check that out. But now we've opened up the texture, let's just go ahead and plug this into the base color. And then if we open up this preview here, we can actually see now, we can actually preview how it looks, which is not too bad. But then when we look through here, we don't actually see anything. Let's go ahead and change this to rendered view. So over here, select this one. You can see we don't see the texture on here, and that's because it's not been unwrapped. Now we could press tab to go into edit mode, press U and unwrap it this way. Or what we could do, just tab to go out of this. We could just add a couple of nodes here, so I'm going to Shift A, go to Input, need a texture coordinate, and then from here we can just take Generated, plug this in, and now we can see it shows the texture. Shift A, go down to Vector, and then add in a mapping node, just between here. Now we can have control of not only the location and rotation, but also the scale. So let's just increase the scale to say 10. There we go, it's looking a lot better. So there's one last thing I want to do to this. If we Shift A, go to Vector and add in a displacement node. And then what we can do, if we take the color and plug this into the height, and then for this displacement node, and then we just need to plug this into the output, like so. we get this kind of bumpy terrain. Looks pretty good for the most part. Over here it's way too extreme, so we can actually reduce this down, go to the scale, and just keep reducing this until you get something that looks good. So again, play around with the displacement until you're happy with it. So for the most part it looks okay. Let's go ahead and give this a quick render, see what we're working with. So we can see it took 13, well almost 14 seconds to render this in cycles, and also there's a few other issues, but let's just change this over to eevee. And then what we can do, if I press number pad 2, it'll just change it to the second slot. So if I have this and then press F12 again just to re-render, we'll see the difference between eevee, which took less than a second, so half a second, and then this is cycles. Overall it looks better because it's obviously a better render engine, but for this example, as I mentioned, it's not going to be an issue because we're going to use a lot of compositing tricks, I guess, to make it look stylized and cool. And the fact that it took half a second to render is amazing, so I'm definitely going to be using eevee to render this. But again, if you want to use cycles, go ahead and use cycles. Anyway, so press escape, let's go back. Now before we move on, we want to optimize this terrain because it's far too big and we don't actually see it within the camera. If we press numpad 0 to go to camera view and then scroll out, we can see this is what the camera will render, and all of this section the camera won't render, but it will still be calculated within Blender. And then if we go down here, we can see we have 65,000 faces. So let's optimize this and make it run a bit smoother. And to do that, it's really simple. I'm going to press the Z key and then change this to the wireframe view, just because it makes selecting things easier. Then I'm going to press tab to go to edit mode, and then I'm going to go to face select mode. And then if I press A twice real quick, it'll just deselect everything. And then we can just select all of these faces. So if I press the C key, and then scroll the middle mouse wheel, I can increase this. I just want to select all of these outside this area. And make sure you don't go too close because you might delete some faces on the inside. So just select all of these like this. Press escape just to close that tool. And we can see anything inside here will be rendered. Anything outside here won't be. So let's continue to select all of this. Like that. And if you remember, we had 65,000 faces. If we just tab into this and delete them, now we only have 20,000 faces, which is a lot more manageable. So there we go. So I'm going to press the Z key, go to rendered. Now I just want to reposition the light as well. So I'll select this light. I'm just going to move this over. I think it looks good to add a bit of contrast between this foreground and the mid section here. Now the light is far too bright for what I want, so I'm going to select the light again. Go down to this light bulb here, click this. Now I could reduce the power, which would do this. It would reduce the strength of the light. But I'm going to set this back to 1000. But instead I'm just going to increase the radius. So something like that, because the idea I have in my mind is this kind of gloomy sci-fi planet surface. I don't know, it's hard to explain, and hopefully it turns out how I imagine it to be, but that looks good for me. Now one more thing I want to do to this terrain is add a bit more visual interest. So let's select the terrain. Let's go to modifiers. And let's add a new modifier. I'm going to add a displace modifier. And we can see it's just gone all crazy. Let's go to new texture, add a new texture. And then let's reduce this strength to 0.1, just so it's real low. We could go down here to the texture tab, or we can hit this key and it'll just change to the texture tab. It's kind of a lazy way to do it, which I use all the time. So now we can open up a texture if you want, or we could use a procedurally generated texture, which is what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to add a basic clouds texture, and then we can play around with the settings. Something like that. Go back to the modifiers and just increase this until you get something that you're happy with. Then I'm just going to add another one. Do the same thing, click new. Change this to 0.1. And then click this button again. Now we can see this is a new texture, but it's also using the type of clouds. So let's just change this to something else. Let's try marble. That looks pretty good. And again, you can change this and play around with this if you want. Jump back to the modifiers tab and increase this. And if you want to limit this, what you can do is use this vertex group. So again, it gives you more control on how this terrain is going to look. So I definitely suggest you going through, add some displacement modifiers, changing the texture, and also limit the area that's going to be affected. Let's go ahead and add some more mountains before this tutorial runs on too long. Let's go ahead and press N, add in another landscape. Now we can see it's created the same landscape that we added before, which is not a problem. Let's just change this to something else. Let's see. Oh, mountain one, that should be good. Let's have a look. Yeah, that'll work. So let's just close this down. So this actually needs scaling up. I'm going to press S. And then let's press G and move this out of the way. So we want to move it away from the camera. And then I'm going to move it over to the left. Bring it down. So again, take your time and position this to how you think it looks good. Through the course of this, I'm definitely going to be changing things. I'm never happy with something. And now we have this in position. I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these faces. And we need to add a material to this now. So let's go to the material tab. And we can actually use the same surface material, like that. And since we scaled this mountain up, we need to press Ctrl A and apply the scale. And now we can see it fixes the scaling issues. So there's our first mountain. We could duplicate this, Shift D, move it over, rotate it, reposition it and make it look different. But instead I'm just going to add another mountain using the aant landscape generator. And you guys get the idea by now. So add the material, make sure we apply the scale, and there we go. I'm just going to add a few more mountains, but I'm going to speed through that so you guys don't have to wait around. And yeah, we'll move on to the next part. So now we're happy with the position of the mountains, we can move on to the focal point. So the idea I had was maybe a hole in the ground where a sphere was coming out of it. So let's go ahead and add in a cylinder. Shift A, mesh, cylinder, and then I'm going to press G and just move this over, and then let's scale it down. Now if we select the terrain, go to the modifiers tab, let's add another modifier. This time we're going to add a boolean. And then for the object, we can either go through the list and select the object, or we can use this tool and select the object like this. Now you might not notice anything different. If we select this object and then press H to hide it, we can actually see the effect of what is happening. And if we look underneath, we can see it's cut a hole through it. So it looks pretty good. I'm going to press Alt H to unhide this. So now let's select the terrain and let's apply this boolean modifier. So let's just hide this. So that looks okay. We can get rid of this bottom here. So I'm going to press Tab, go into edit mode, face select mode, and let's select this face here. I'm just going to bring it down a bit, like that. And then I'm going to press X and delete it. Now we can see the texture here has been stretched. If we scroll around like this, and go to edge select mode, then select one of these edges here. I'm going to press Ctrl E and then go down to mark seam. So now we need to select these inside faces. So I'm just going to go to this edge here, select the edge and then press Ctrl plus just to increase the selection. Then let's change this to face select mode. There we go. So now if I press numpad 1, then press U, then we can unwrap. Now if we go back, we can see nothing has changed. It's still all stretched out like this. I'm just going to open this window again, which is the shader editor, and then open the materials. And then real quick, I'm just going to add a new material. Go to this material icon here, add that surface material, so it's the same material twice. So we can see how many users right now. There's 8 users. So if we click this, it's now created a new material and renamed it. So with this material selected, I just want to get rid of these 2 nodes here. Now all we need to do is just assign this material. So I'm going to tab So open it back up. We already have this selected. We already have the new material selected. So now if we just hit assign, now we can see it has this. Since we unwrapped it, looks a lot better. There probably is an easier way to do this. Now we have this hole in the ground. Let's go ahead and press F12, see how it's looking. So we can see we still have this cylinder we need to get rid of. So press Alt-H to unhide everything. Select this and delete it. And even though it looks quite rubbish now, when it comes to the compositing, it should look a whole lot better, I'm hoping. So the next thing I want to do is add that visual interest. So press Escape, and then I'm going to add in that sphere. So Shift A, go to Mesh, UV Sphere. So we can see it's a little bit big, so I'll scale it down, move it up, something like that. We also want to shade smooth. So, and we can still see it's not perfectly round, so let's go ahead and give this a modifier. Let's give this a subdivision surface. So that looks a lot better. So F12 again. So I think it'll look good if we have a light coming from the inside as well. So Shift A. Let's add in a light. I'm going to use a point light and move this down. Something like that. And in fact what I'm going to do is, and I'm going to move this on the y-axis, just bring it forward a bit like that, just so we can see more of the front. And then let's change some settings. So let's change the radius. Shift D and move it on the y-axis, so move it behind it. Just add a bit of a backlight to it. So it looks okay. It's maybe still a bit plain and boring, so maybe you want to add some more visual interest. Tab into edit mode, select some of these vertices. Then I'm going to enable proportional editing by pressing the O key. Just press G and move some of these about like this. So we add some more visual interest. And press F12. So again, you want to take your time and make these look better. So I'm going to go through here and add some more visual interest by extruding some stuff. So there we go. Once you've added some more visual interest and you're happy with everything, we can move on to the compositing. So let's go ahead and open this up. Let's change this to the compositor. And then we want to make sure we use nodes. And we want to preview what's happening, so let's enable backdrop. Then if we hold Control, Shift and left click, we can see it adds a viewer node, and then it's far too big, so I'm going to press N, go to View, and just rearrange this. Something like that. So we can see right now on the render layer, we have just 3 passes. We have the image pass, the alpha pass, and the depth pass. And if we Control, Shift and left click each one of these, we can preview what they do. And we just want to add one more pass. So if we go over here to the view layer, and then the passes tab, and then enable the mist pass, and we can see we now have this option here. But if we connect this up to the viewer, so Control, Shift, left click, we don't actually see the information yet, so we need to re-render. So we can press F12, just re-render this, and now when we press Escape, we can see the mist pass, which looks awesome. I think that's pretty cool as it is. But one thing you'll notice, we don't actually see these mountains in the back, so we need to increase the mist pass. We go to the 3D view. See, this is our camera, so select the camera, and then if we go to the camera icon, and then if we go down to viewport display, so we can enable any one of these, but we just want to enable mist. And now we can see where the mist starts and where it's going to end. And you might be wondering where that is. It's not here in the viewport display. It's not over here in the passes layer. It's actually here in the world properties. And then go down to mist pass. And then I'm just going to reduce this start point just to be right in front of the camera. And then I'm going to increase the depth just so it goes past the geometry like this. There we go. So now when I re-render this, we'll notice the rear mountains show up. So press F12, then press Escape. Now we can see we have mountains in the background. So now let's go ahead and composite these together to make this boring image look a lot better. So Shift A, go to Color, add in a mix node, And let's take the mist pass and plug this into the bottom. Then if we change the blend mode, and again, depending on what kind of look you want to go for, you can play around with any one of these and get a different look. Though for this example, I'm going to use the add blend mode. Just adds it like this. So it goes from this to this. But I also want to add some color to this mist. So between here, I'm going to add another node. So Shift A, go to mix, drop this in. And then I also want to change this blend mode to multiply. Change this to a nice blue color. Bluey green, that's kind of a nice color. Again, you can change this to any color you want. I think an orange color might look good. Yeah, it does. It's a nice sort of deserty planet kind of look. Or you can choose any color you want. But I'm going to go through here now and play around with this until I find a color that I like. Now the cool thing about this mist pass, I'm just going to connect this up to the viewer node. So control left click. You can see this is now connected to the viewer node. If we Shift A, go to converter, add in a color ramp. We now have control over this mist pass. So for example, this white section, we can bring this back and make it look a lot more misty in the distance. Like this. Same thing for the foreground, we can actually make it less misty. And again, it's up to you, you can play around with this. So now I just want to connect this up to this multiply node. So instead of using that, I'm just going to plug this into here. Like, there we go. Now if we connect this back up to the viewer node, we can see, we'll be able to see the control that we have. Again, as we did before, you can make it more misty. Or make it less misty here at the foreground. Push it off into the distance so you have a lot of control. If you want to make it even more misty in the foreground, select the black handle, select the black color, and then just increase this. And we can see it becomes more misty in the foreground. But this is the kind of look I want to go for, so very thick atmospheric look. If that makes sense. So now I have this, I want to darken it up and add some contrast. Shift A, go to color, mix node, drop this in. And again, this is down to my personal preference. If you don't want to do this part, you don't have to. So then I'm going to connect this up to the bottom image slot. Then Shift A, go to converter, RGB to black and white, and drop this on the bottom string here. Then if I change this to soft light, so we can see it's now a lot more contrasted, so let's reduce this a bit. Now another thing I want to add is the focal blur, as I mentioned before. So it's going to blur around these edges and into the distance. So to do that, you need to make sure we have the camera selected. Go to the camera icon. And then we want to use depth of field, so just enable this. And then if we just go back to the camera view for a second, so press numpad 0. So right now we can see all this is in focus. If we go down here to focus on object, we can select an object to be focused on. So we're going to use this sphere. If we go down to aperture, we can decrease the f-stop value, which would give us a more blurry image. So as we start to decrease this, you'll notice it starts blurring around here, but it keeps this area in focus. So again, play around with this value until you get something that works for you. So now if we press F12, re-render this, looks a lot better. So I'm going to add a few more things just to make this look a little bit cooler. So let's go ahead and add the sky, Shift A, go to color, mix, drop this in, Shift A, input, image, go ahead and open up an image, and go ahead and connect it up. If your image isn't big enough, just go to Shift A, distort, and then scale. Drop this in here and change this to render size. So we're not going to be using most of this. In fact, we're only going to be using a small section of it. If we go back to the mist pass, and if you remember, as I mentioned, we can limit the mist pass. So I'm going to Control Shift left click just until we see the mist pass again. Now we're going to be creating a custom mask just for the sky. So if we Shift A, go to converter, go to color ramp, and just drop this in here. So from the mist to the viewer node. And then I'm just going to increase this black value until we just see the sky. Now one thing you might notice straight away, the white value is not perfectly white. And that's because Blender by default is using filmic in the version I'm using anyway. So to change that, I think, I always forget where it is, render, yeah, down here to color management, and you can just change this view transformation from filmic to standard, and then we're using the correct colors. If by the end of it you want to change it back to filmic, then by all means you can change it back to filmic, but I like to use standard for now. I'm going to plug this back into the viewer node, and then let's take this image and plug it into the factor. So if I mute this was before, and we just add this sky. Now of course it doesn't look good because we need to change the colors. Let's go ahead and do that now. So here I'm just going to shift A. Let's first, I'm going to use a hue saturation value, desaturate this a bit, and then I'm going to add some color by going to an RGB curve. Let's add some green, some blue, so something like that. Now you can see we still have some issues around the edges of the mountains here, so what we could do, so from our custom mask here, we could add a blur, so go Shift A, filter, blur, and then we change this to something quite small, maybe 5. It doesn't look too good, so what I'm going to need to do, I'm just going to delete this one by pressing Ctrl X. This will keep the string connected. I'm going to Shift A, filter, and then we're going to use a dilate / erode node. This is very helpful. So then if we increase this, it gets rid of that white line. So it looks pretty good. That doesn't look too bad. The sky probably could do with a bit more work, but you guys get the idea. Now we've added a sky. And then one more thing I'm going to add is a vignette, just to draw the attention to the center. And I'm going to cheat, I'm going to use the VFX nodes add-on. If you guys don't have this add-on, I will link to a video on how to create a vignette if you want. Or if you want to download this, it's a free Blender add-on, so go ahead and download it. And if you want, you can use some of these other tools like the film grain node or the gradient node. It's entirely up to you. So I'm going to add the vignette node, which is now down here. Drop this in, and let's make a bit of space. So the vignette, all we need to do is just increase the feather to something that looks good, maybe a bit more. And now this is a lot darker, we're losing that sort of misty look, so I want to go back. We go back to this color ramp here. I'm going to select this black handle and just increase this. Something like that. And again, I'm going to play around with this. The sky definitely needs a bit of work, but keep playing with it until you get something that you're happy with. You can add loads of other nodes if you want to, but when you're happy and you want to render this out, if you have the Darkfall VFX nodes add-on enabled, you can go to the render settings here. Just go through this and change all the settings that you need, so the start and end frame, the resolution, if you want to change the frames per second, but also the output. If you don't have this add-on, don't worry. All you need to do is go over here and just change a few of these settings, so the dimensions, the output, and then we want to change the file format. I'm going to change this to an ffmpeg video. And then for the encoding, in fact we can use the presets. If we click this icon here, I'm going to choose H264 in MP4 format. And there we go, we can go ahead and render this out as an animation. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.